North Korea ushered in the Lunar New Year with yet another weapons test this past weekend and more bellicose rhetoric about South Korea perishing if provoked. So what is the significance of the latest weapons test by North Korea? How are pundits explaining the relative calm in South Korea despite the rampant threats by North Korea? And what are the prospects of Seoul's diplomatic ties with its neighbours and allies this year? Welcome to yet another edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Today I have our panel of foreign journalists for their thoughts on the latest developments here on the peninsula and more. I have Nicolas Rocca with me. Nicolas, welcome.
Good to be here.
I also have Jack Barton with us. Jack, it's good to have you back.
It's great to be back.
Right, Nicolas, let's start off then with news of another missile test by North Korea that took place earlier on this Wednesday, as well as a weapons test, I believe, that took place on Sunday, and its significance, of course.
Well, it's in the line of what we've been seeing recently from North Korea. There's been a lot of cruise missile tests. That's also the one that's been tested today off the coast of Wonsan. So yeah, we've seen a lot of cruise missile tests, and all of the recent military developments have seem to have the same target, which is South Korea. We did not see recently any big intercontinental ballistic missile test that could, send more message to the United States. It's been more weapons that could be used for localized conflict in the region, Japan, in the peninsula, or maybe the island of Guam. The other weapon that was tested Sunday was artillery system for 240 millimeter rocket shells. It seems like experts have been saying that it's similar to previous weapons that have been used by North Korea. This is not an entirely new development. Apparently, the accuracy is superior, and it's a qualitative change according to the propaganda. It's hard to know because very few photos have been released. It's hard to assess its efficiency. But I mean, all those weapon tests are of significance, but it's more of a general trend, and I would maybe worry more of the capacity, for instance, of a KN-23 short-range ballistic missile that we've seen being used in Ukraine, which will give North Korea real-life data of how their weapon will perform. The cruise missile also may represent a form of target, a form of threat, because they are harder to intercept for a South Korean defense system. So there's a diversity of weapons development in North Korea, and most of them are clearly now recently directed towards what they call now their main enemy, which is here, South Korea.
Right, indeed. And talking about that, Jack, addressing an audience at a military anniversary, I believe last Thursday, Kim Jong-un called South Korea North Korea's primary enemy and reiterated, as Nicolas pointed out, his intentions to destroy South Korea if provoked. What do you suppose, Jack, is behind the latest hardline rhetoric by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, and of course, this isn't the first time he's mentioned that in the past few months, talking about the need to suppress South Korea if there's a contingency and take back control, and a lot of warlike talk. We've seen a diversity of opinions, perhaps the most alarmist coming from Siegfried Hecker and Robert Cullen. The latter used to work with the US State Department, was actually involved in North Korean talks. Both of those gentlemen in an opinion piece saying they believe that he has made the decision at some point to go to war again and to actively, to militarily try to wrest back control of South Korea. Others saying, well, we should take the weapon systems development very seriously. There's no real signs of that. You don't go shipping off so many ballistic missiles and artillery pieces to Russia if you're preparing for a war yourself. And also, we know that a lot of the army has been mobilized for agricultural work. So you don't do that if you're preparing for a war around the corner. And nonetheless, they say, all the steps being taken are alarming, and others again saying, look, this is part of the regular election process. We've got National Assembly elections coming up here, so we would normally have saber rattling to try and get some members of the Assembly who are more favorable, at least to trying for better relations with Pyongyang, and then we have the presidential elections in the US coming up at the end of the year, and we always see major saber rattling. So my personal opinion is it's probably a little bit of all of that, but I would also just put that aside and point out, what we all know is when North Korea says it's going to do something, it almost never does. So if it says we're going to blow this up or turn Seoul to ashes, but when it does something like sinking the Cheonan in 2010 or artillery on Yongpyong or laying landmines that maim Seoul, it never telegraphs that. So whatever it's saying probably isn't going to happen, but something probably will happen, but we won't have any insight into what that is until it does.
Right, and against that backdrop, Nicolas, though, despite the aggressive posture by North Korea, the public here in South Korea appears to be little affected by the bellicose rhetoric, as reported by the Associated Press. Now, could you tell us a bit more about that particular coverage, and also, of course, your own observations here in South Korea with regard to the public response?
Well, it's hard to blame South Koreans to being used to 70 years of, a different cycle of escalation, diplomatic talks. So I think, what the Associated Press pointed out is that globally the general feeling is concern, but not an alarming situation. And if you take a look on the younger generation, for instance, it makes sense. I mean, the ties with North Korea are now very distant for them. The relationship is different. The desire for unification is not as acute as it's been. So all of this makes sense. This being said, as Jack pointed out, there are reasons for concerns of some form of contingency happening on the peninsula, and you can feel that the Korean public has some worries. First of all, I think the main one is the trust in the United States to react in case of major escalation. In a way, there's the idea like, will the United States sacrifice San Francisco or Los Angeles to different Seoul? Probably not, say a lot of persons, and you can see that in different kinds of surveys, because there's now an overwhelming majority of South Koreans that are in favor of either a national program for nuclear weapons or the maybe U.S. nuclear weapons deployed directly in the peninsula. So there are concerns, and then depending on where you go, who you speak to, there also are some concerns. As Jack mentioned, there's been shelling in Yongpyong in 2010. I've been there recently, and of course, all this atmosphere is very worrying for the inhabitants there, for the residents. On the 5th of January, they were summoned to go to shelters for a couple of hours. It brings back very painful memories for them. Other regions, other border region, of course, they're seeing more military deployed near the border. So there are some concerns. That is true, but I mean, in a way, people are used to it here, so I think it's a bit of both. Right,
to a certain extent we have become inert then. Jack, Pyongyang also recently voted in favor of dissolving inter-Korean economic initiatives. Now, in response, pundits here have voiced a bit of concern about the disruption of these diverse cross-border engagements. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is really in line with what Kim Jong-un has been doing for the last month, which is ripping up every agreement that is aimed at inter-Korean cooperation. In a way, it makes sense, given he's designated South Korea as an enemy state, making it clear that there is no Korea, there is no one nation on a peninsula, there is a DPRK and an ROK. In a sense, saying these are two separate people, and trying to build the policy around this new, I suppose, philosophical direction. But also South Korea in January dissolved a foundation, a state-backed foundation, aimed at promoting the Kaesong Joint Industrial Area. So South Korea has quietly been doing what North Korea is doing very loudly at the moment, and clearly there is intended to be an effect coming from Pyongyang, otherwise you wouldn't do it so loudly. But really, it's just reflecting the reality. There is no economic cooperation between North Korea and South Korea. There is no prospect of economic cooperation. The Mount Kumgang tours have really been mothballed after that South Korean tourist was shot back in 2008. There's no sign of Kaesong Industrial Area, which once had 125 companies, I think more than 50,000 North Korean workers in there. After that was shut down in 2016, there is no sign at all that that will be reopened again. So in a sense, yes, it is just reflecting the reality on the ground. But having said that, I think with North Korea, there is an effect that they are intending to get from this loud and dramatic proclamation. What that effect is, of course, again, we can only guess. Perhaps Kim Jong-un, perhaps his sister Kim Yo-jong and a few others really know what the intent is. But overall, it's just reflecting the reality.
Right. Beyond the Korean peninsula, Nicolas, Seoul, for its part, has been calling on Beijing to take on a more constructive role with regard to Pyongyang-related matters. Now, Beijing, in response, called on Seoul to take on a more friendly, optimistic, objective, that is, and friendly China policy. All that being said, what are your thoughts with regard to Seoul-Beijing ties this year?
Well, I don't see any major changes on the North Korean aspect of things. Maybe Beijing is not that happy with the new bromance between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, but they might not show it openly. I don't see any change on the position on North Korean defectors, for instance. I think Beijing, in a way, is quite content with the status quo. It doesn't want a war because it's right there at its border, so close to Beijing. I'm not sure they will be very happy also with major escalation around the Yellow Sea, where they have their own interest there. So on this side of things, I don't see, unless, I mean, there's a change in the current administration here, change in the administration in the United States, unless there's a lot of, geopolitical changes, I don't see any major evolution of the Beijing policy. On the Seoul side, I think President Yoon's China policy has been finally, in a way, quite balanced. He's been pointing out, he's been friendlier and friendlier with Washington. The islands, he made the alliance stronger. Of course, this annoyed Beijing. He made some declaration on the Taiwan Strait that highly displeased Xi Jinping. But at the same time, when Nancy Pelosi came after her trip to Taiwan, here he didn't see her. He was nowhere to be seen. So I think he's trying to, see where the South Korean interests are in this relationship, and they're mostly economic in a way. We've seen for the first time trade deficit. Lower exports from South Korea to China, lower imports from China to South Korea. So, the economic relation is not going so well, but the two countries need each other on the economic front. South Korea is still a major partner for China when it comes to semiconductors. SK Hynix, Samsung have large factories there. So I think we could see more of the same. That being said, the trilateral talks between Tokyo, Beijing, and Seoul have started again at some lower level. Let's see if the three leaders will meet next year. There had been talk for a meeting, and we didn't see that happen. So let's see if there's some major change. But I think, it's hard to guess always that we could see more of the same.
Right, hopefully trilateral talks this particular year then. Jack, staying with diplomatic ties, former US President, that is, Donald Trump, he raised quite a bit of alarm with remarks this past weekend about letting Russia have its way with any NATO member who fails to pay for defense. Keeping that in mind, what are the implications of these remarks for the ROK-US defense alliance under a possible Trump leadership?
Yeah, there is a little bit of separation of the issues. So often Trump says something that perhaps even the Democrats fundamentally agree with, but says it in a way that is just, to quote Biden on this one, dumb, shameful, and dangerous. And I would have to agree with those comments. The issue of underfunding of NATO is real in some countries. They're supposed to be 2% of GDP. Many countries are under that, Germany included. The big exception, of course, is a lot of the states that border Russia. Some of them have much higher, almost double that level. And not just the Republicans, but the Democrats have quietly been trying to get these countries to put more in a while. And Trump really has sort of taken a dislike, I think, to NATO, and it's quite personal. There is less of that here in Asia. There is less of that antagonism. And Korea, for the past few years, even though it's not part of NATO, has a mission there since 22, it's been spending about 2.5% of its GDP on defense. So it's actually above the NATO average. So it would be hard for Trump to take aim at South Korea on that issue anyway. But what we've seen is Trump is very transactional. So it's like, he doesn't really care about traditional alliances or what it means for freedom and democracy or where America stands in it. It's transactional. And so what are we getting out of this? And in the past, he's threatened to take the troops out of South Korea. We've seen all the fuss over the funding of the Camp Humphreys, and we're seeing ahead of the election that South Korea has pushed forward the latest round of negotiation to try and get that out of the way just in case Trump comes in. So we're not going to see that issue, I think, of funding in the same way that NATO is being targeted, but that doesn't mean there won't be a lot of trouble if Trump does come to power. And without any doubt, he'll be pressuring South Korea to do things. And as Nicola mentioned, there will be I think the talk again of should we have nuclear weapons here in South Korea will gain momentum if there is a Trump presidency.
Right. And Nicholas, how does a re-election of Trump look to affect Europe's concerns over a broader Russian aggression?
It doesn't look very good for Europeans. I mean, when you have a candidate for the U.S. presidency that says that, that invites Russia in a way to invade countries that don't respect the 2% GDP defense investment, of course, it doesn't look really good, and it's had. I mean, there was a lot of comments in Europe. Josep Borrell, one of the head of the European Commission, mentioned that NATO cannot depend on the humor of a president of the United States. There's been Olaf Scholz, Chancellor of Germany, that said that EU should go into war economy. President Emmanuel Macron also mentioned that. I think it kind of reignited the talks about Europe defense, EU of defense, in a way that has been in the books for a long time. But I think the European Union and all the countries in Europe, in NATO, made the choice to go towards the US solution that they deemed at the time maybe more less costly and more efficient. But right now what we're seeing in Europe is that there's a real struggle to make ends meet in terms of the promise that has been done to Ukraine to send weapons. I mean, the promises are far from being met. We can see that a lot of the big defense industries, I mean, France, Europe, France, Germany, and others struggle to produce and to send the weapons to Ukraine, as well as make their stocks, refurnish their stocks. So I think now Europe has a very little amount of time to prepare itself to the possible consequences of a Trump presidency. On the prospect of a larger Russian invasion, it's very hard to predict because it depends on so many different factors, how it will go in Ukraine right now, the war readiness posture of NATO. I mean, yeah, it's a bit hard to predict, but definitely it created a lot of discussion in Europe and possibly some changes.
Right. And Jack, do you suppose a return by Mr. Trump to the White House would perhaps create fresh momentum for the impasse here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I don't know if it would create momentum in a good way. We can never tell what Trump's going to do. There might be a miracle and it might be positive. It would be unlikely that Kim Jong-un would want to engage in dialogue again, given the humiliation of the Hanoi summit and the fact he's been a lot of this missile testing and behavior is probably in a way trying to wash away the humiliation of the outcome of that summit. So going back into that for another round, I don't think would be on his mind. Maybe it would happen. But I think it'll be quite the opposite. It'll be more, as Nicola was just describing, for Europe, it'll be similar here. And if we look at Ukraine, this is a country that when it gave up its nuclear stockpile, one of the world's biggest, the US, along with others, the European Union, gave it a security pledge. And this was a cross-party security pledge. So this was the Republicans and the Democrats coming together and saying, give up your nuclear weapons, and if you're attacked, we pledge to defend you. And so we can already see that is absolutely hollow with the Republican Party in general. The Democrats have lived up to their part. So yes, if Trump comes into power, we can see the Ayatollah in Iran looking around going, well, what can we do? What can we get away with? Although he tends to be tougher on Iran and a bit more pro-Israel. But certainly, I think Putin will feel he has a much freer hand with Trump in power to do what he wants. I think Kim Jong-un will feel he has a much freer hand to do things while Trump's in power. And this is a huge danger. I think while there is a Trump presidency, everyone who's been wanting to do something, perhaps Taiwan, Trump's already kind of indicated in his last presidency he would give a pass to China if it forcibly took back Taiwan. So this is a very dangerous time, and unfortunately it's looking like it may be a fait accompli for a Trump presidency on And yeah, it will be nervous times ahead. I don't think it will be positive momentum, unfortunately. I suspect it will be quite the opposite. I hope I'm wrong.
Oh, me too. I hope you're wrong right there. Nicholas, North Korea, while it has been dismantling its cross-border initiatives with South Korea, it has been boosting its engagements with Russia. In fact, the first group of Russian tourists, I believe, traveled to North Korea last Friday, since the pandemic, that is. Do tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, it was a test. I mean, we're not seeing yet any long-term prospects of tourists coming back to North Korea. It was an agreement between the region and North Korea, so a bit less than 100 Russian tourists were able to go to North Korea from the 9th to the 12th of this month. They went to discover the slopes of a ski resort in North Korea. I mean, it's significant in a way that it's the first foreign tourists, and we see the interest of North Korea in welcoming more tourists. It's a moneymaker. That very short trip was around $750 per visitor. So we see the interest of North Korea, but it doesn't say anything on how it will open and if it will open. Maybe one of the possibilities is that it will open to friendly countries in a way. They could also open larger to more countries. It's hard to guess what it means, but I mean it's in a way a good prospect on the will to open from the DPRK.
Right, open up its borders then. All right, well, I believe that's all the time we have for this edition then. Nicholas, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Jack, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Always a pleasure.
Right, well, on that note, we say goodbye. We return same time tomorrow. That is Thursday. Do join us then.